Geography today takes us to our beginning study in Chapter 9, the Tropical North. We just finished with studying the country of Brazil. We're going to move to the Tropical North region in South America that includes the countries of Ecuador, Colombia, Venezuela, Guyana, Suriname, and French Guiana. We're going to take a look at the physical geography of this region today in Lesson 1, study the history and then the cultures of these places, what it's like to live there in the modern times today. Just wanted you to be familiar with where these are located in the continent of South America. Here again in the yellow you have Ecuador, Colombia, Venezuela, Guyana, Suriname, and French Guiana as those 6 different countries that we're studying in this region. One of those that might actually not be designated a country, but we'll find out. Along with your textbook that you have in front of you, you should have your guided reading activity that looks like this. There are 3 sections that we're going to cover today. The first are the landforms and waterways, in which the different countries or colonies is listed here, those 6 that we just mentioned. You're going to identify the landforms and identify the important waterways that are listed in each one, so you can just list those out in bullet points. Secondly, we're going to read through the climates of this region and differ between the different types of climates that you're going to see based on the geography and where they are located. They're all relatively in the same portion for the equator, so the geography and the elevation is going to have the biggest influence in that climate. There are 5 different items which you're going to label the climate of each of the region described below. And then lastly, we're going to read through information about the natural resources in these different areas. And you can see that each country is listed here in this vertical column, and if that country has that resource, you're going to put a check mark in that area. So if it says it has oil, you can see here that it's already done for you. Ecuador, Colombia, Venezuela, Guyana, and Suriname all have had oil resources that they've found. So as we're reading, we're going to make sure that we check to see what type of mineral resources, what type of agricultural resources, and what type of fossil fuels or energy resources the countries have. You're just going to fill this in with check marks based on your reading comprehension, and then maybe even going back and rereading that, specifically looking for each of those countries' list of resources. Jump into our lesson today. Our objectives today are to discuss the physical geography of the tropical north, including landforms and waterways, to describe the various climates, and to identify the natural resources. As you saw, what's expected in our guided reading activity. Let's get into it. Landforms and waterways. South America's tropical north consists of 5 countries and a colony. There it is. From west to east, you have Ecuador, Colombia, Venezuela, Guyana, Suriname, and French Guiana. Colombia is the tropical north's largest country, and Venezuela is the second largest. Each is more than twice the size of California. Ecuador and Guyana are the third and fourth largest, are about the size of Colorado and Kansas, respectively. Suriname is about the size of Washington State, and French Guiana, the smallest, is the size of Maine. Together, the countries of the tropical north total only about 1/3 of the size of nearby Brazil. Landforms of the tropical north. Ecuador, Colombia, and Venezuela have the region's most diverse physical geography. The Andes mountain ranges, which extend to the length of the West, South America, run through each country. Some of the peaks have elevations or heights above the level of sea that exceeds 18,000 feet, almost 3.5 miles high. Many peaks are covered with snow year-round. About 40 peaks are volcanoes. Cotopaxi in Ecuador, at 19,347 feet, is the world's highest active volcano. In Colombia, the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta Mountains along the Caribbean coast are the world's highest coastal range. Colombia is the only country in South America with coastlines on both the Pacific Ocean and the Caribbean Sea. The mountains make travel between the coasts difficult, so does the Darien, a wilderness region of deep ravines, swamps, and dense rainforests along Colombia's border with Panama. West of the Andes, Colombia and Ecuador have narrow lowlands that border the Pacific coast. East of the mountains, more lowlands extend into Peru, Brazil, and Venezuela. The southern half of the lowlands is part of the Amazon basin. The northern half is a grassy plain called the Llanos. This plain also covers most of northern Venezuela. Southern Venezuela contains a heavily forested region of rolling hills, low mountains, and plateaus called the Guiana Highlands. Along the border with Brazil, groups of forest-covered mesas called tepuis rise to heights of 9,000 feet in places. The Guiana Highlands extend east into Guyana, Suriname, and French Guiana. Rainforests cover most of the region except for a narrow band of low and sometimes swampy plains along the Atlantic coast. So here's what those tepuis look like, those large plateaus that stick out of the landscape. Abundant waterways. Rivers flow across much of northern South America. The 1,300-mile long Orinoco River is the continent's third longest river. It's more than 400 tributaries from the North's largest river system. The Orinoco crosses Venezuela into a giant arc dropping from the Guiana Highlands through the Llanos to the Atlantic Ocean. One of the tributaries flows over Angel Falls, the world's highest waterfall. Angel Falls is more than 20 times higher than Niagara Falls. From the top of the Tepui, the water plunges more than half a mile to the fall's base. The tropical north region has coastlines on three bodies of ocean water. Ecuador and western Colombia lie along the Pacific Ocean. Northern Colombia and Venezuela lie along the Caribbean Sea. The Atlantic Ocean washes the shores of Guyana, Suriname, and French Guiana. Colombia's two main rivers, the Magdalena and the Cauca, flow north across Andes Plateau and the valleys of the Caribbean Sea. These rivers form important routes into the country's agriculture and the industrial interior. Both can be navigated by commercial ships for much of their length. Other rivers that begin in the Andes flow west to the Pacific. Of these, Ecuador's Guayas River is the most important because it has made Guayaquil the country's largest city and a major port. Rivers in Guyana, Suriname, and French Guiana flow north and empty into the Atlantic. Most are shallow, slow-moving, and responsible for the region's swampy coastline. They are not useful for long-distance transportation into the interior. The Galapagos Islands. The Galapagos Islands lie in the Pacific about 600 miles west of Ecuador. They consist of 13 major islands, 6 smaller ones, and many tiny islands called islets. The Rocky Islands, which were formed by underwater volcanoes, are owned by Ecuador. Most have no human population. The island's isolation makes them home to many unusual animals, such as lizards that swim and birds with wings, although they do not fly. In the 1800s, British scientist Charles Darwin studied the island's animals to develop his theory of evolution. Today, the islands are a tourist attraction, and many are protected as national parks. Our note check from this first section. South America's tropical north consists of 5 countries: Ecuador, Colombia, Venezuela, Guyana, and Suriname, and the colony of French Guiana. It's not a country itself, it's a colony still owned by the French. The Andes mountain range runs through the Ecuador, Colombia, and Venezuela, and the Galapagos Islands lie in the Pacific. They consist of 13 major islands. Here's a quick look at the notes that you would have filled in from this section. It looks to see that you have the countries listed here, and obviously in this note portion it's not showing you those, so make sure that you match those up. If you need to pause the video, this would be a great place to pause to make sure that you caught each of those different things to say which countries those items fall into. You can see that the Andes Mountains is in the countries of Ecuador, Colombia, and Venezuela. That's listed right here. Ecuador, Colombia, Venezuela, the different types of important waterways that are attached to those countries, and then what the landscape looks like in terms of, here you see it's described as the Darien in Colombia, this hard, dense rainforest, or the Llanos, this plains across the north, the rainforest that exists in most of these areas, and the different types of coastline or physical features that you're going to have. So again, if you need to, pause this to make sure that you have those notes appropriately filled in. Climates. South America's tropical north lies along the equator. Despite its location, the region has a variety of climates. Many of the variations result from differences in elevation and location, and from the influence of ocean currents and winds. Tropical climates. The region's coasts, interior lowlands, plains, and highlands all have some type of tropical climate. This means warm temperatures throughout the year. Much of the coastal and eastern lowlands of Ecuador and Colombia have a tropical monsoon climate. So there's a difference between the tropical climate and the tropical monsoon climate just based on the amount of rain. With a short dry season and a long wet season of heavy rainfall, in Colombia's coastal Choco region, which includes the rugged Darien, it rains more than 300 days per year. This produces more than 400 inches, about 33 feet of rainfall each year, making it one of the wettest places on Earth. The Llanos of Colombia and Venezuela have a tropical wet dry climate with an annual rainfall of 40 inches to 70 inches. Most rainfall is between May and October. Average day temperatures are above 75 degrees throughout the year. The Guiana Highlands have a tropical monsoon climate in those places. In other areas, the tropical rainforest climate, which has no dry season, is normal. So tropical rainforest is this darker pink here. You can see that it's a little bit further south than what would be this northern area. You've got this marine west coast area, this is where you're going to get all that major amounts of rain. And then you've got the tropical savanna, where you get a little bit less rain in this northern portion of Colombia and Venezuela. Here you've got somewhat of a semi-arid region that's wrapped off by those mountains in this coastal area, and just a variety of where those climates show up based on the different types of features. So where those Andes Mountains are existing, where the large Llanos Plain is, where the Darien heavy rainforest exists, where the Guiana Highlands exist, those are the major factors that influence that change in overall climate. The Llanos of Colombia and Venezuela have a tropical wet dry climate with an annual rainfall of 40 inches to 70 inches. Most rainfall is between May and October. Average daily temperatures are above 75 degrees throughout the year. The Guiana Highlands have a tropical monsoon climate in some places, and in other areas a tropical rainforest climate, which has no normal dry season. Guyana, Suriname, and French Guiana have the same climate as Venezuela's highlands. Yearly rainfall ranges from 70 to 150 inches. Their coasts are not as hot as you might expect because of the trade winds, steady winds that blow from higher latitude toward the equator. The Caribbean coast of Venezuela and Colombia is also cooler. It has a semi-arid climate, receiving less than 20 inches of rain per year, and that's what's showing that semi-arid region right up here. Because of the different winds that are coming from the southern area, those trade winds back to the east, you actually have a cooler climate that's brought in, not the warm climate that you might expect because you're so close to the Caribbean. Cooler highlands. Mountain climates depend on elevation from 3,000 to 6,500 feet. In is the Tierra Templada, or temperate land. This zone has moderate rainfall and temperatures with daily averages between 65 and 75. Next is the Tierra Fria, or cold land, reaching about 10,000 feet. A colder zone called the Paramaro begins at about 10,000 feet, and daily average temperatures in this zone are between 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Wind, fog, and the light drizzle are common in this zone. Vegetation is mainly grasses and hardy shrubs. Above 1,500 feet, the ground is permanently frozen with snow and ice. Again, we've looked at and studied the different varieties of where those elevation changes cause different types of climate zones. That's, again, as you go higher, the air thins out and there's less of that heat capacity that can be kept there. So as you go higher in elevation, it's usually cooler in that same way. The natural resources in this region. Read through this section and then go through our note check. What you need to make sure that you're keeping track of is when it lists the country, note the different types of resources that it lists in that country, because then you're going to fill those in by adding a simple check mark to this section. Natural resources. Tropical rainforests cover much of the north, but lack of roads and the region's physical geography have made it difficult for many of its countries to exploit this natural resource. The North's largest countries, Venezuela and Colombia, are its richest and most diverse in other resources as well. Fossil fuels. Oil is found across much of the tropical north. Venezuela is South America's top producer of oil and ranks 11th in the world. Put a check in Venezuela. Oh wait, that's already done for you. Some of the world's largest known reserves are in the Llanos at the mouth of the Orinoco River and offshore in the Caribbean. Large amounts also exist around Lake Maracaibo, South America's largest lake. Along the country's northwest coast, Venezuela has some of the world's largest natural gas deposits and is South America's second largest coal producer. Most of the coal lies along the country's southwestern border with Colombia. Colombia is South America's largest coal producer with major deposits in its lowlands. It is also South America's third largest oil producer with deposits in the Amazon lowlands, the Llanos, and the Magdalena River Valley. Ecuador produces less oil than Colombia, but it accounts for 40% of Ecuador's exports. It is piped over the Andes from oil fields in the east. Suriname and Guyana also have oil resources, but they do not produce enough to even meet their needs. Minerals and gems. Gold is found throughout the tropical north. The largest deposits are in Colombia's mountains, eastern Ecuador, and Venezuela's Guiana Highlands. In Ecuador, thousands of miners live in remote jungle regions and do dangerous work in tunnels that sometimes collapse in heavy rains. Diamonds are mined from Colombia to Suriname, but Colombia is better known for high-quality emeralds and is the world's leading emerald producer. Guyana is one of the world's largest producers of bauxite, a mineral used to make aluminum. Venezuela and Suriname also have major bauxite deposits. In addition, the four countries have imported deposits of copper, iron ore, and other minerals. Except for gold, Ecuador's mineral resources are limited, and French Guiana has no important mining industries. you can look at the top of page 278. You can see the different types of mining that's happening in terms of Colombia being the world leader in emerald mining, and also the finding of different types of diamonds, sapphires, emeralds, and rubies in this region. Agriculture and fishing. The different elevations and climates in Ecuador and Colombia allow farmers to grow a variety of crops. Both countries export bananas from the tropical lowlands and coffee from the Tierra Templada. Ecuador's agriculture, however, is not well developed, and the amount of farmland is limited, and most rural Ecuadorians grow only food to meet their family's needs. Corn, potatoes, beans, and cassava are common crops in both countries. Colombia produces rice, wheat, sugarcane, and cattle for sale, as well as cotton for the country's largest textile industry. Coffee is Venezuela's main cash crop, a product raised mainly for sale. Venezuela's main food crops are corn and rice. Most farming takes place in the northwest, and most ranching happens on the Llanos. Only about 10% of Venezuelans are farmers or ranchers, and much of the same is true of Venezuela's neighbors to the east. Guyana, Suriname, and French Guiana have little farming because much of the land is covered by rainforest. Any farming that takes place mainly happens along the coast. Fishing is not a major economic activity in the tropical north, which is unusual for countries that border the sea. The region's people do not eat much fish. The major catch of its small fishing industry is shrimp, most of which is exported to other parts of the world, because you and I really like to enjoy shrimp. At least I can speak for myself. I love shrimp, and I'm glad that it comes from this region and they are willing to export and share that with the rest of the world. You can see here on the map the different types of oil fields and where they're located throughout this entire region. You can see the different types of mining activities that are happening throughout this region, and the lack of actually fishing resources to the north. Maybe there's a little bit more that's going on over here in the Pacific area, but not in the Caribbean whatsoever. Let's quickly go through and check our notes to make sure that we've got those completely filled in before my computer dies. Oil, gold, natural resources are found all across the tropical north. Diamonds, emeralds, bauxite, copper, and iron are also contributing to the region's economy. And differing elevations and climates in Ecuador and Colombia allow farmers to grow a variety of crops, coffee of which is the most valuable in this region. So here's the checklist of what each of those countries have. You can see that Colombia, which is the largest of the overall countries, obviously has the most resources, probably because it has just the overall largest amount of land mass. Venezuela is the next largest country in this region, has the second most check marks in terms of all the different resources that it has. And then you have the differences between Ecuador, Guyana, and Suriname, smaller countries that have really specific items based on their location and elevation. And it doesn't list anything in French Guiana, probably because it's a colony. It has obviously some type of economic activity, but not enough to where it's going to be comparable to these other larger countries in this region. If you need to, again, pause this to take a look at what should be filled in. By this point, you should have each of the different aspects of your guiding reading activity completed. Thanks for following along. God's blessings.